where we'd be without him, where we Muslim community and our Mexican citizens would be. Can't all wait for his presidency to start. So I will try to summarize my conversations kind of in two formats, because often we go to these ISNA conventions and hear great speakers, but we don't necessarily have tools to work with when we leave. So, the question I was asked is to provide specific tools that we can use in our everyday lives and how we should think about things moving forward. So the suggestions that I'll make, some will be more cerebral in nature and some will be practical that you can use hopefully the next day. So with that said, I think the beginning of this conversation, not that we need to have a deep conversation about it, is that we have to understand the origin of Islamophobia and all these negative anti-Muslim sentiments, and ask ourselves, do we truly have more bad apples than anyone else, or is there more to it than that? Is there a large Islamophobic industry behind this, and does our foreign policies have anything to do with this? And again, we don't have time to talk about these things today, but the point is that you can't really answer the question unless you fully define, you can't answer the question unless you really fully define the problem. So to speak about the practical solutions. So first things first is, from my perspective, we have to understand how elections work. I think one of the mistakes that I feel some members of our community make is that they look at elections as a horse race, where you pick a horse, you bet on a horse, and you hope that your horse wins. And unfortunately, that's just not how politics works. You have to really engage both sides. You really have to understand that at the end of the day, one of the two candidates are going to win. And if we put all of our eggs in one basket and really bet on one side, then that could be potentially a strategic mistake. Now, I don't want to ruffle anyone's feathers here. I'm not saying go financially support Donald Trump or anyone else. What I'm saying is we have to understand this engagement concept. Even the president of Mexico understood, considering his comments about Mexicans and the rapists and murderers, he understood that there was going to be two candidates left, and he specifically stated that I want to engage both candidates. So, and I think the Muslim community also needs to understand that. The second thing is that I think we have to learn to speak as Americans to Americans. So we can't be outsiders. I think too often we're viewed as outsiders, and we are spoken to as we're outsiders. This otherization concept that you probably heard, I remember even talking about it just a couple of years ago. So, and I think part of the problem is that even we view ourselves as outsiders. And that's, again, part of this otherization concept. If you remember the events in Paris a few years ago where there were these really intense riots, the Muslim community, often the North African community, were going around burning cars, and if I remember right, at the peak of it, they were burning like 600 cars a day. And there were second and third generation North African French citizens that referred to back home, Morocco, Algeria, as back home. That was home to them. Third generation French citizens. So it's those types of sentiments. If you don't view yourself as someone who lives there and is a citizen, then you're just not going to think yourself, as part of the fabric of the society. And I think the Muslim community also needs to speak and think in those terms, is that we're part of the community, and I think we need to make sure that we haven't made ourselves the outsiders either. So, and this particular thought, that this doesn't necessarily mean you have to dilute your identity or whitewash your culture. It simply means that you have to realize that where's home. So home for me is not where my grandparents are buried. Home for me is where my grandkids are going to grow up. The third practical solution that I'd like to propose is be an activist. Be involved. I think politics for us as a Muslim community is often around dinner table and friends gatherings and around biryani. So it's got to come out of those settings, and it's got to translate into real action. So first things first, we're in an election year. Please vote. Remember what President Obama said, don't boo, vote. The next thing is, pick you just heard Brother Ismail talk about, pick something that you're passionate about, whether it's at the local level, whether you're concerned about healthcare reform, prison reform, immigration reform, whatever you're passionate about. There are so many advocacy groups that you can get involved with. Just pick something and spend time and get involved with them, learn about the process, and have a Muslim voice in those types of settings. And that's probably the most effective thing you can do. And honestly, if you can't do that, then at least financially support those organizations. And honestly, if you can't do either of those, then you can't complain. So I will just briefly tell you my own story because, professionally speaking, I'm a dentist. And I knew from the beginning, that I will never have the kind of impact that, let's say, a full-time activist like my friend here, Dr. Hatem, would have as someone who's got a different job. So I wanted to figure out how can I leverage what I know and how can I leverage and address this issue that we have a lack of representation of Muslims in the public sector. So that's where the idea of Islamic Scholarship Fund was born, was to really encourage Muslim students to go into these particular fields of studies that we think have the highest impact on public opinion, which forms public policy. Now, I did that as essentially a side activity, and alhamdulillah, it has grown to be the largest Islamic scholarship organization of its type in the country. And inshallah, again, we have numerous number of plans to grow it. And if you don't mind my shameless pitch about that Islamic Scholarship Fund, so it has truly turned into a platform of services to encourage students to go into this field, including a program that we've developed a couple of years ago called Congressional Leadership Development Program, where we actually train and place interns in the Congress. Now, alhamdulillah, we've been blessed that 100% of our interns actually get placed in very important internship positions in Congress. And in fact, this year, for the first time, one of our interns got a job offer as a staffer in the Congress. So it is, you don't want to talk about quick return on investment. It's absolutely turned into placing Muslims in the organizations and places that actually can make an impact. So this is just my story, and it's just an example. But again, you can do anything. If you have a lot of time and a lot of passion and desire, start your own nonprofit. But I'll just caution you that running a nonprofit is not for the faint of heart. 80% of nonprofits cease to exist in 5 years. So you better absolutely love what you're doing, or else the organization might not be around. But the more effective way is to find an organization that resonates with your heart and mind and support them. So those are the action items I wanted to share with you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair, Hamid, for getting us together for the ISF. So Hamid actually started the idea in Northern California, and we have been working to try to get the Islamic scholarship off the ground and running, and while praying to get a genetic mutation in the Muslim community. It seems that genetic mutation is beginning to take shape, because many of our students on college campuses, they only study the 2 Muslim majors. Either Muhammad Engineer or Fatima Ali MD. I'm at UC Berkeley, and began to be familiar with the EECS major. I'm in the humanities, I'm in the social science, in the library. EECS is electronic engineering and computer science. So I go into my roster in Muslims in America, 250 students, and all the Khans, the Siddiqi, the Quraishi, the Dimashqi, the Masri are EECS. And then one day you find one person in there, alhamdulillah, he's English literature major. And I say, Takbir, we got an invitation here. The problem is, once again, is with the Muslim student, but I think the problem is that with the mothers and fathers and the grandparents say, oh, you're not going to get married if you study like Islamic studies or English literature. Who's going to hire you? And you're not going to be able to open a house and so on. And you get the parents who are calling you to try to talk sense to their daughter and son and to see if you could actually disrupt the genetic mutation that is underway. And if that's not possible, then you ship them to Egypt, Pakistan, and so on to see if they could get them married ahead of time so they get some real sense in their mind, because they look at the income level that corresponds to the major. And that's, I would say, at the foundation is anti-Islamic or contrary to Islamic ethic. Allah is the Razzaq, not your degree. Right? If you think that the piece of paper that you have is the basis of your risk, then you are really not you're not set up foundationally within our Islamic tradition. So Allah is the Razzaq. The major can be a facilitator, and you know in the company it's not your manager that gives you the risk. It's Allah that's giving you the risk. He's just giving people to be asbab in there, and you get caught in the asbab and don't see actually the reality behind the asbab. So that gets me immediately the shift in here. We're actually, as a Muslim community, I'm reminded of Charles Dickens, we are in the best of times and the worst of times simultaneously. It's just in which part of the times you actually are focused on. Do we have Islamophobia? Absolutely. I'm just like eating, drinking, and writing on a daily basis about Islamophobia. But we also have some inspiring work that is taking place, and I think we need to embrace that tremendous work that is occurring. We've been at it for a long time, not Muslims, but this country, but I would say also early Muslims. The Muslim slaves that were brought to America, and Sylviana Diouf says between 10 to 20%, and some go as far as 30% of the Muslims, of the slaves that were brought to America were of Muslim background. We know this because the only surviving manuscripts of handwriting of slaves are written in Arabic, either a Quranic text or often Maliki text, Islamic jurisprudence from West Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. And if you just trace the history and trajectory of the African Americans and the slaves and the struggles that they've been through, we as Muslims today, we're just like getting what you call scratches on our hand from a little kitty cat called Trump, and we think that we actually are having a hard time. Hard time is what African Americans faced from 1876 to 1950. 4,000 lynchings occurred in 12 southern states. Once again, from 1876 to 1950, 4,000 lynchings took place. And if you read the narrative of Malcolm X in his biography, you will know that his father also most likely was killed in Michigan by the Klan. And interestingly, today, the Klan Facebook has 25,000 individuals on it. Now, how come we don't have a CVE for the KKK in this country? That tells you that the struggle against injustice, against racism, against all oppression has to be an ongoing and also has to be encompassing overall. So let me go on the specifics because we only have 10 minutes and we're, faculty members. We're trained to have 50 minutes or an hour and 20 minutes. So I'm going to skip immediately to say what we need to do. First, we're people of hope. We are people of hope. If you read the Quran, if you read our tradition, just like any of the religious traditions, it's a message of hope. It's a message of hope. And if you read the narrative of the Prophet, it's the successful narrative of the Prophet that give us inspiration. At no time you should feel that you are actually defeated or weak. However, let me caution you, if you depend on creation, you're going to be completely and often disappointed. Our dependence is on Allah. Our audience is only one. Success or failure is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All what you need is actually to go forth and carry the action and the work that Allah is calling on to you. This is the tradition that Malcolm X comes from. This is a tradition of Gandhi with his own tradition. This is the Martin Luther King. Right? So the tradition, once again, is that you have to be a person of hope and to engage in the world in a hopeful message. Fear tends to mobilize people easily, but hope is the foundation. And as you could say, the arc of history is very long, but tells toward justice. And we need to be people that believe that we we have justice on our side, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the temporality that we deal with. So that's one. Second, it is not about us. I know that we are suffering as Muslims, not only here but transnationally. It's absolutely the case. But you have a suffering that is occurring across the world, and we need to be people that have consciousness of our own conditions and our connection to the rest of the people around the world. If you're wearing outfits that are made in foreign countries, you know that you are part of the problem, not part of the solution. The longer the chain of supply from abroad to your own clothing, your own food, your own consumption, the more that you are part of the cycle of oppression. On whole food, or as we say in California, whole wallet, you go into the shelf and you actually get what you call pomegranate seeds. Pomegranate seed, you flip on this, $375, and it's actually packaged in Egypt. Now, I want to understand how from Egypt, how many employees are sitting there that are unable to eat the pomegranate seed themselves, yet they're sitting in there and packaging it to be placed on a boat or a ship to go across the Mediterranean, to cross the Atlantic, to land in New York, to be shipped on the train, to arrive in California distribution center, to be placed at the shelf at Whole Foods for me to actually pick it up for $375. That means there's so many people across the globe that are all working in order to put us on their shoulder. So our heavy weight, physically, but our heavy weight on the rest of the world have to be understood. And that has to be part and parcel of our understanding to build coalitions that respond to these questions in a fundamental, clear way. Because our missions in this world is custodianship, but not exploitation. Often people translate Islamic terminology because they have already adopted Eurocentricity and capitalism in reading the Quranic text. It is a custodian relationship which is to preserve, nurture, and transmit to other generations. It's not to exploit. That comes from 18th, 19th century theological understanding that adopted capitalism, and we need to be people that deeply understand our own tradition and not to think our mission in the world is basically to replicate some notions of capitalism. And increasingly here a critique of Muslims that we think that Islamic finances, as Bismillah on top, Alhamdulillah at the bottom, and in between is Adam Smith and Darwin. That for me is contrary to the Islamic epistemic. Assalamu alaikum.